What would happen if a chosen one was born, complete with godlike powers? Would they become a philosopher king, a messiah, or the ultimate tyrant? Dune explores this question through Paul Atreides' rise to power. And in this video, we're going to go deep beneath the surface of Dune to understand its many complex themes and what it's really about. The main focus of this video is the first Dune novel, but we will touch on other parts of the series, so spoilers ahead. Let's begin by locating Paul in his place, the desert world of Arrakis, because the first thing Dune is really about is this setting. As a young journalist, author Frank Herbert was commissioned to write an article about the Oregon Dunes, a desert which the United States Department of Agriculture was attempting to stabilize by growing poverty grasses. The article was never published, or at least not until many years later, but he became captivated by this setting and its ecology. We can see this inspiration in the book today, especially in Liet Kynes, the planetary ecologist hoping to transform Arrakis into a green paradise. This idea permeates not just the first book, but the whole series, with successive characters either trying to transform Arrakis or recreate it on other worlds. These attempts are usually linked to Arrakis' most famous inhabitants, the spice-producing Sandworms. These giant creatures who can destroy settlements and devour huge machines might at first glance appear to be Herbert's sci-fi version of dragons, and in earlier versions of the story they were described as just that. But in the final book, their symbolism is an inversion of their fiery cousins. Where dragons are usually depicted as greedy abominations of nature, capable only of destruction, sandworms are a key part of the ecology of Arrakis. This inversion of traditional hero's journey symbolism runs through the book, and we'll pick up on it again later. But let's stick with sandworms a bit longer, because sandworms represent a second key theme of Dune: man's impact on his environment and his environment's impact on man. That's because sandworms aren't native to Arrakis. They were brought there long ago, and it was they who transformed it into a desert world. This theme also comes out in the idea that the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, the Fremen and the Sardaukar, are raised in the harshest environments. With this setting established, Herbert needed characters and a plot with which to bring his desert world to life. After several early outlines, Herbert became inspired by 7 Pillars of Wisdom, the autobiography of T.E. Lawrence, and he began thinking of his story as Lawrence of Arabia in space. This was enhanced by drawing from Sabbaths of Paradise, from which he directly borrowed quotes. Just like his desert setting, we can still see these influences in the final book. Metaphorical Westerner Paul embracing the local culture and becoming a leader of the Fremen in their guerrilla war against a powerful empire. The Islamic inspirations on Dune from these books don't stop there though. The Fremen themselves started out in early drafts as just freed prisoners, literally freed men. But gradually they evolved into the descendants of modern-day Islamic cultures. Spice melange is another great example of this, a parallel for real-world oil, but the spice is perhaps even more important in the Dune universe than oil is in our world. That's because it shares properties of many other real-world substances too. It has healing and life-extending properties, like those often attributed to spices like saffron and turmeric, as well as modern medicines. It's as addictive as the heroin grown in the poppy fields of Afghanistan. It's used to create paper, fabrics, and more, just like hemp. It's used in oracular rituals like the ancient Greek drink Gigion, and it produces mind-expanding visions like magic mushrooms, the use of which may well have contributed to Herbert's imagining of the Dune universe. The ubiquitous spice is an example of another of Dune's important themes: sources of power. Paul, like the emperors who came before and after him, controls spice supplies to keep other factions in line. Economic control. Paul took control of the spice using the military might of the Fremen, who he in turn controlled through manipulation of their religious beliefs, a trick he learned from the Bene Gesserit. He achieves this by using his innate powers as the Kwisatz Haderach to establish himself as a charismatic leader, including leading the charge on the front line of the battlefield and in deadly one-on-one duels with enemies like Jamis and Feyd-Rautha. This charismatic authority leads us to another key theme of Dune, because Herbert still wasn't satisfied. By this point, he wanted Dune to be a huge epic, a generation-spanning tragedy exploring that question I asked right at the start. What kind of leader would a godlike galactic emperor become? So Herbert, as a big fan of classics, looked further back into history, all the way back to ancient Greece. There he found the Atreides, a family cursed to tragedy by the gods when their founder Tantalus decided to test whether the Olympians really were omniscient. He did this by feeding them the dismembered corpse of his own son. Herbert named Paul an Atreides to link him to this cursed house, and the connection is confirmed in Children of Dune when Paul's sister Alia is visited by the memory ghost of Agamemnon, son of Atreus. Paul exists as something between the demigods of ancient religions and prophesied messiahs of modern ones. Through much of Dune, Paul's story seems like a typical hero's journey, which itself is based on ancient myths and legends. Awakening of special powers, guidance from mentors, taming a metaphorical, if inverted, dragon, obtaining an elixir, and battling a dark wizard. But just like the role of Sandworms, Paul's journey becomes inverted. Paul is plagued by dark visions of unleashing a terrible holy war on the universe. For most of the book, he believes he can avoid his fate, and struggles to do so. But towards the end of both book and movie, he faces a personal tragedy, which makes him more willing to do whatever it takes to win. In the movie, this is the artillery attack on the Fremen base. In the books, the murder of his baby son. This puts Paul on a darker path, and at the climax of the book, when Paul decides to marry Irulan in order to seize power and relegate his beloved Chani to a consort, we get the strong hint he's at the start of a slippery slope, and his story will end up much like those of his ancestors and the images he's seen in his visions. Going from hero to tyrant, unleashing death and destruction in the constant pursuit of power, cursing his heirs, and fulfilling the very prophecy he was trying to avoid. Paul's pursuit of power is understandable. It's the only way he can see to protect the people he loves. But ultimately, as the series progresses, it's his undoing. That pursuit of power, its corrupting influence, and the damage charismatic leaders can do when they wield such power is what Dune is really about at its core. If you're interested in finding out what happens next in Dune's underappreciated sequel, Dune Messiah, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments below, including if I missed anything. Until next time, keep writing.